Costello, and I'm here with Dr. Iris Freelander, and today we'd like to talk to you about the art of being present. You know, in today's busy world, all of us have so many things on our minds and seem to be so busy doing so many different things. It's really important for us to be present, isn't it, Iris?
Yes, it certainly is, and many people phrase that as keep your consciousness in present time or living in the now, whatever we call it. When we keep our consciousness in present time, when we keep it in the now, we are more fully living our life, and it's as if, well, we're cheating ourselves if we don't know it, isn't it?
Absolutely. And, you know, so often we talk in our teaching and in our counseling about the importance of all of us remaining as aware as we can of the present moment so that we can live the present and so that we can share our lives with other people. But so much of our time is spent thinking about the past or worrying about the future, and so our minds drift in and out. And I guess today, especially when we have so many demands upon our time and our efforts, we have to work a little harder on being present, don't we?
Well, we do have to. We have to consciously do that. And usually, if we're forging ahead in time, then we're concerned. And so it doesn't do us much good to do that. And then we're grieving for the past one way or another, grieving that we didn't do something or that someone did something that they ought not or so forth. So if we can just keep our consciousness in present time, then we live more fully and we're able to be far more productive. And whatever we have to do goes far more easily and smoothly. And also, we're easier to be with for our family and friends, because as we're present and fully living with them, and we can look at that being with children, babies and children, as being in present time, because they're so constantly in present time. They just want what they want at the moment. And if you can sidetrack them for a moment, then they can be deterred from whatever it is they want, but they still have their consciousness in present time, and they're so happy, carefree, and just free in their expression, so we can copy them.
This issue of consciousness, I guess, is something maybe we should touch upon, because for some of our viewers, it may be a new concept. For us in New Thought and Metaphysics, it's an old concept, if you will, and we understand consciousness, but consciousness even goes beyond the dynamic of thought, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Well, consciousness is all that we are, and so we have our subconscious and supraconscious, but our consciousness is where we are. So if we scatter our consciousness, then that's one thing. But if we keep it in present time and keep it in the present, then we're more fully living life. And we could just ask our viewers to look at their own lives and see when they're happiest, and if they don't see that they're happiest when they're keeping their consciousness in the present. And because I'm sure that they would find that that's true, wouldn't they?
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people do find themselves unhappy in their thoughts of the past, unhappy or worried about their thoughts of the future, and unhappy in the present moment. And I think when that's the case, certainly when our consciousness and our mind dynamic is in that place of life, of utter unhappiness, we need to take a look at what's going on with our thought process, and also what's going on with our view of the world and our view of life and our view of ourselves. And that really is typically a reflection of what we think of ourselves. We think if we're unhappy so often, or individuals who are unhappy think it has to do with what someone has done or said, or the conditions in the world, or lack of money, or our employers or those at work that are creating this negative environment. But in fact, if we're unhappy all of the time, or if we're unhappy most of the time, we're generally unhappy with ourselves, aren't we?
Yes, it lies within ourselves. And even when we're worried about those that we love who are ill, we read many stories of people who have said, well, I put it in God's hands, and then I was able to rest, I was able to sleep, I was able to do whatever I needed to do. And isn't that true? When we pray and turn the problem over to God, then we're more relieved. But we can do that daily. We can do it on little things as well as larger things. I used to ask my husband, did you pray about that? And he'd say, I don't bother God with trivia. And so I thought that was very short-sighted. I think he was just teasing me. But God can be bothered with whatever we have in our minds and in our hearts, because it helps us so much to do that, then when we see that we're helped in that way, then we need to just pray more often and turn it over to the divine reality, and then we're more free of that.
Yeah, we spend a fair amount of time teaching people how to be centered.
Yes.
And of course, for a lot of people from Western traditions, and also people who maybe haven't been introduced to some of the techniques of reducing stress, and especially mental stress in their lives today, this issue of centering may be a brand new idea or concept. But being centered and being present in the moment is tremendously important if we're going to go through and grow through the experiences of life, and if we're going to be able to live positive and affirmative lives. Because if we can't center ourselves, then, and if we can't find ourselves at a center of peace and understanding in the present moment with other people and with the circumstances and situations of life, then we're going to be at conflict all the time, not only with what's going on around us, but more importantly, we're going to be at conflict internally, and that turmoil is going to create an absolute devastating effect on our lives. And of course, we spend a fair amount of time in our counseling work and at the Center Church also talking about the connection of mind, body, and spirit, and we know what stress can do to our bodies. And so it's not only a spiritual issue, or it's not only a mental issue, it's a physical issue as well, because when we cease to have this centering in the present moment, and this centering of understanding and realizing where we are in life, and begin the process of dealing with where we are in life, then we really begin to wreak havoc on our bodies and on our minds, and we really get exhausted all the time. And I don't know about you, but in counseling, I hear a lot of people telling me how tired they are all the time. And of course, they're tired because they're using their energy in so many ways that are counterproductive, and they're just wearying themselves because of this constant internal turmoil and the lack of centering peace that they should have. And for some people, that's a spiritual issue. For other people, it can simply be a mental issue. It can be a time of being able to be at the core of our understanding and realization that there is a way to deal with every circumstance and situation, and not to be in the midst of these circumstances and let those circumstances create the turmoil that just stirs our minds and brings us confusion and then uses and dissipates our energies.
Yes, and I've heard everyone talks about journaling, and most spiritual teachers tell everyone to journal. Mm-hmm. And I never thought that was as important as some people think it is. I think that sometimes it can get us into trouble. But I was rereading something I had written. I took a correspondence course more than 30 years ago, and I reread that correspondence course. It was a thick book, about a 3-ring binder about that thick, and it was classes for 2 years. And so I reread my lessons that I sent in, not the lessons they sent me, but my answers, and then their personal answers to me. And according, in line with what you were just saying, I was amazed at how often I told that lady, I'm tired. Mm-hmm. And I had a husband and 4 children at home, and 3 stepchildren that I just gained, and my younger son was still home, and they were like 2, 12, and 14. And I just let them get to me, obviously. And I'm sure I knew better, but I didn't, or I wouldn't have kept on whining that I was tired. But that's a prime example of what you just said, that we allow ourselves to fall into those traps. And at the time, we don't realize it. But our listeners might just take heed and assess their own lives and see what they can do if they're feeling tired, if the doctors call it something, put a name to it. It might not be that. It might just be that they're tired of living their life the way they're living it. And life is a series of choices. We can change whatever it is we want to change. It's too bad I didn't have the foresight to do that 35 years ago.
But you've done it since, and you've done it beautifully. But that's a tremendous example of how you were at a place in life, and that's where you were. Mm-hmm. That's where you were. You had those obligations, you had those children, you had the husband, you had the house that you had to care for, and you had all the other obligations. And the reality was that by not being present in the moment, although you were present in the moment, but you were allowing the present moment and the circumstances to determine how it was you were responding to life in general. And so you were constantly fighting and you were weary.
Yes.
And the fact was that had you had some of the tools that you've learned in these intervening 30 years
Yes.
and some of the techniques that we use in our teaching, you would have been able to go through that experience, probably begin to move through a centering process, be present with those children much more fully, be present in your house and in your role as you were at that point in time, and be empowered and strengthened in it, and have had looked back upon it and not been tired. You would have been instead been empowered, and you would have been invigorated. It's interesting how people who are happy with what they do and people who are centered and are at peace in the midst of the processes of life are able to deal with the difficulties and the challenges and the perplexing problems and the many, many demands, and yet they don't grow weary.
Yes.
And they actually grow stronger.
Exactly. Well, it's just like, as you were speaking just now, I was realizing that I was resisting too much, and we've talked a lot about that, and I've used the example that it's when we resist that we create problems within our own bodies, and obviously that was my problem at the time, 35 years ago, that I was resisting their activities, where if I just sat back and let them be, then I wouldn't have been as tired. And I didn't complain about, I didn't say why I was tired, I just said I was tired, as I observed through my classes, that I don't know why I'm so tired. And that was, and obviously I didn't know I would have done something about it. So we can all take heed of other people's problems and apply them in our own lives.
We also get tired when we deny where we are.
Yes.
And I think we see a lot of that in counseling, and a lot of that as we talk to people, and people are denying the way that they feel. And of course, if we feel the way that we feel, it's okay. But if we're feeling negative in a negative way about any circumstance of life, there is something we can do about it.
There's always something. Life is a series of choices. That's one of my favorite phrases, because we can always do something about everything. We have to do it within ourselves. Whatever it is we do, we have to do it within ourselves. It's just like 35 years ago. I had to do that within myself, because my family were nice people. It was just tiring for me, because I was not used to all their rhythms and all their different activities and the way they related to me. And so we have a choice to sit back and assess honestly, but we have to be honest in that. We have to see, what am I doing? What am I resisting? What am I doing wrong?
And we have to understand that we have personal responsibility,
Yeah.
and we talk a lot about that. And after the break, we'll talk more about personal responsibility and the choices that we make in life. We'd like to pause at this point in the program and offer you the opportunity to receive some literature so that you can continue to study the ideas and concepts that we're sharing with you.
Would like to offer you the opportunity to receive one of these free booklets to further your understanding of the new thought message of confident living. Each month we will feature a different booklet, which will be mailed to you free and postage paid. Simply address your request to Confident Living at P.O. Box 7726, Long Beach, California 90807.
We have a series of choices in our lives, no matter where we are, don't we? And so often it's hard for us to realize that we are making decisions and we're making choices consciously and unconsciously. And it goes back to this issue of consciousness. If we can be present in the moment, if we can be present in the experience of the now, we begin to make good choices. We begin to make wise choices, and we begin to make choices that allow us to learn the lessons that life has come to bring us, and the choices that are going to empower us and strengthen us and bring us the peace that we need. Now, one of the things, before we get any further in choices, I want to make real clear, as we always talk about, we're not talking about avoiding difficulties. And, you know, so often as people watch us and some of the things that we've written and some of the talks that I give, people, and you as well, people will come up and say, well, if I just do these things, can I just avoid the difficulties of life? Well, that's not what we're talking about at all. No one is about avoiding the difficulties of life. What we're talking about doing is making wise choices in the midst of the difficulties of life, so that we're able to experience the present moment and get from that experience the lesson that we need. And of course, what you shared just a few moments ago was a wonderful example of what lessons you learned.
Yeah.
Now, it was 35 years ago, and of course, in those 35 years, but in that time, you learned so much, and there was so much from that experience that was wonderful. But you didn't make a conscious choice at the time. And had you made a conscious choice, you would have come out of it in a more quick fashion, and you would have been empowered much more quickly. But choices are really ours to make, aren't they?
Yes, they are. And that was a 2-year period for me. But I wish now I had kept a journal so I would see, but I might not have said how tired I was in the journal. But I think that we can all look back on our own lives and see the pattern that we form and see the pattern that we've lived. And when we do, we might be very surprised at our own lack of deeper understanding, because it's really quite simple. And I know you said that people think that we have like charmed lives, and one young lady was a guest at our church recently, and she said to one of our members, "I bet Iris has never had any problems in her life." And so my friend said, "Doesn't she wish?" and then she said, "Well, we all have problems in our lives." And Iris has had more than her share. One might think, and we all have problems. Everyone has problems. And you know what's a problem? Whatever our problem is, it's gigantic to us at the time we're facing it. It doesn't have to be something totally devastating. If it affects our lives, then it affects our lives. And like you say, if you're sick, you're sick. If whatever, you're whatever. We have to face the fact that what is, but we have the power to change it. And we need to use that power. There was a phrase going around so often, and we used it in our meditation meetings at the church for 4 years, take back your power. And that's what we need to do. We need to take back our power. And that doesn't mean we're going against someone else heavily and strongly in an unpleasant way. It just means we have the courage of our own convictions. And again, we can look at children and see how they react. And it's really wonderful the way small children will just stand up for what they believe in. And we can take lessons from them. But then, as soon as they see that they're not getting what they want, then they go on to something else. And that's wonderful. That's what we need to do. It probably saves their sanity when all these big people around them tell them what they can and can't do so much. So they would have to run from one thing to another. And we can do the same.
Absolutely. And children are a wonderful example because they're present in the moment. And the other thing that's really wonderful about children is they're present with those around them.
Yes.
And they interact with such honesty. And,
Yes.
you know, those are keys. They're real simple things. And it's amazing how far away from the simple things we get in life. But we really need to be present with the people around us. We need to be present with our families and our coworkers. We need to be present with the people that we walk past on the street in the grocery store. You know, I've often said, you know, we go into a restaurant and very often we decide, place our order and sit there for a few minutes and we need something and we can't remember who was serving us because we're not present with the people around us. And young children are always present in the moment. They're present with those around them. And then the other thing that you touched upon, which is just tremendous, and that is once they don't get their way or they decide that there's something else to do, they move on. And we are terrible as adults in moving on, aren't we? We don't want to move on. We want to hold on. And in our holding on, we want to be absent in our holding on. And so in doing that, we isolate ourselves and we isolate those around us. And then no one benefits and everyone is hurt. And so what we need to do is to be present in the moment, to be present with those with whom we are at the moment, just as Iris and Mike are present with each other. Right now, we see each other. One of the things that we say in business consulting that we do so often is when we encourage people really make eye contact, put the pen down, you know, and of course, put the pencil down and look at the person. And of course, in today's environment with all of our computers and our telephones and our pagers and our cell phones and all of it, we have so many things that distract us. And what we need to do is really go back to what our mothers used to tell us when they got angry with us, and they'd say, look at me, you know. And of course, you know yourself, and I know so well from counseling in divorces and broken relationships, so often people say, he or she just doesn't doesn't see me, and they don't hear me, and they don't listen to me. And that is so terrible. And children are growing up with the realization or the belief that their parents don't see them, that they don't respect them as persons, and that they are not one with them in the present moment, in the experience, that we're moving through life without ever being conscious of each other, and that's a tragedy. We need to be present with the people around us, and we need to let the people around us know that we are present with them. And it's true in intimate relationships, and it's true in superficial relationships. We need to make that connection.
Yes, I was talking with, interesting enough, a plumber today. He was doing some work in my neighbor's front yard, and when I came home in the middle of the day, my neighbor introduced me to the gentleman there was two gentlemen working there. And one had already come over and introduced himself earlier in the week. He said, I'm going to be working here for about 5 days. I'd like to introduce myself, because he's going to be halfway in my front yard. But the plumber was very interesting. His little daughter was there with him, and she's about 7 or 8 years old, very bright. And I said, my daughter and my little grandson had just treated me to lunch, and he said, I have a 2-year-old. She was 2 in May, and he said, I don't talk baby talk to my children. I never did. And his older daughter is in the GATE program, which is an advanced program for children in school. And so he said his wife said something to the baby about her banky, and he said, we don't have bankies in our home, we have blankets. And so he instructed his wife he said it in the way that he was instructing her, not suggesting that we talk to our children as adults, and they did. And so his older child is showing, and the younger one too, how they really respond to be treated as individuals, not as this little nondescript infant, but to be addressed as an adult. And I know when my children were younger now, very young, my friends would say, well, you don't speak to your children as if they're children. You talk to them as if they're an adult. And I said, well, they'll learn. And they did. And so I think parents today are giving their children more advantages in that way than a generation or two ago, don't you?
Absolutely. And this respectfulness of persons is tremendously important, and it can't begin too early.
Yeah.
And if we find ourselves in a situation where we're not demonstrating that in our lives, we can always change. It's a choice. And it goes back to this issue that if our lives are not the way we want them to be and that we know they should be, we can always change. We can change our behavior, and we need to change our behavior. And so the one thing that I'd like our viewers to do is to examine themselves and take a look at how it is they deal with those around them in their intimate family circle and in life in general. And do they spend time in the present moment? Do they spend time seeing and being with the people who are around them? And do they experience life with them in its fullness?
Yeah. And as you said earlier, even when we go out to lunch, out to meals, we can acknowledge the waiter or waitress. We can acknowledge the people in the checkout counters in the stores. We can acknowledge people wherever we're coming into contact with people, because we need to do that. And then we're treated in a different way too. So it's like our consciousness, I think, is being elevated all the time. And the global brain, the mass consciousness, is ever more and more higher. And so as we do that, we are helping in that way to help the mass consciousness and global brain ever more fully to rise upward, aren't we?
Absolutely. And we're also creating space in our own life for this to come back to us. And one of the things that we know about life is that things do come back, don't they? And so as we are able to recognize people, the persons and the people around us as individuals, and respect them, as we give them attention, then those around us see this behavior. And as we open ourselves in this way, we then receive the respect that we deserve as persons. And so this ebb and flow of life is very real. And so it's very interesting if we watch the dynamics of families and individuals and companies, corporations, churches, where we see that the person is not really respected and revered and honored, then we begin to see that the group, and going back to the global consciousness or the mass consciousness, is behaving in the same way. And yet if one or two begin to behave in that connected way, then the whole dynamic of the organization changes. And we see it in corporate life, we see it in family life, and we see it in schools and institutional life as well. If we can just have one or two that come together, especially those in leadership, who demonstrate to those around them the importance of being present in this moment with those around us, great things can happen.
Yes, and do. And we have a much happier life that way. And we're keeping our consciousness. We've learned the art of being present when we do that. And whether circumstances are pleasant or unpleasant, we still need to stay with it. We still need to be present with that and work and go through that. And as we do, we find then that life is far more happy, we're far more healthy, and we spread light in the lives of others far more fully. And that in itself is a joyous factor of life, isn't it?
Absolutely, and we do need to be present even in the pains of life.
Yes.
And you and I have done a lot of counseling and work with people at the end of life and in terminal diseases and illnesses, and we see that dynamic so often. And that is that people who are connected and those people who learn and practice this art are able to be so much more fully aware and participants in the process, even though it's a negative or painful experience. And we have to understand that our behavior needs to be consistent, even in the painful and difficult times. We don't need to run away from problems. We don't need to do that at all.
Yeah.
What we need to do is to apply these techniques and principles to our lives, whether they're the best of times or the worst of times. And out of that, good things can happen.
Yeah, so we don't want to hide from life, because when we do, it just has to, we have to face it one time or another. And I can remember at times in my own life that have been difficult where I've been offered medication, and I've said no, thanks. I'll just have to face it sometime. And so I think that we sometimes are present enough in our lives that we realize that we can't prolong agony, we can't prolong pain when there's been a death in the family or when something bad has happened that makes us very sad. Then we have to face it at the time. And if we do, then we're far happier in the long run than if we put off facing that.
Absolutely. We need to face life the way it is. We need to deal with life the way it is, and we need to do so in a positive and affirmative way, and we need to be present in the moment. And that's the key. And the art of being present is the principle we've been sharing with you today. We hope that the information has been useful, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
And Iris would like to extend a cordial invitation for you to join them this Sunday morning at 11 a.m. for our weekly celebration service at the beautiful Seaport Marina Hotel at the corner of Pacific Coast Highway and 2nd Street, adjacent to the Marina Pacifica and Marketplace shopping centers. There will be a guided meditation, prayers, spirited music, and a dynamic, life-changing New Thought message. Please join us this Sunday. You will be warmly welcomed into the company of like-minded, positive, and uplifting people. And remember, whatever your dream, whatever your vision, you can attain it through confident living.